Cold case has possibly been cracked with the help of DNA evidence. A man is now facing charges in Alabama for killing 2 teenage girls nearly 20 years ago.
Tracy would have been a Christian leader in this community. You know, she had a love for her brothers, unlike anything I've ever seen. And JB, I think, would have been a dancer or a choreographer.
According to investigators, Beasley and Hollett got lost on their way to a party in the summer of 1999. The next morning, their bodies were found in the trunk of Beasley's car with gunshot wounds to their heads.
Without any answers, another year that we're, still trying to find them.
The murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. In July 1999, 17-year-old friends J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were traveling from the town of Dothan to a field party where they planned to celebrate J.B.'s 17th birthday. Somewhere along the way, they got lost. After pulling up to a closed gas station, the girls got directions from a kind woman. Then they pulled onto the highway and disappeared. It didn't take long for the car to be discovered, where a chilling scene was found. Welcome back to Cold Case Diaries, where we shed light on mysterious cases from around the world. Today, we delve into the case of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett and show you how this case was solved after almost 20 years. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon below, as it motivates us to create more intriguing content for you. So, without further ado, let's dive right into this mystery. Dothan is currently Alabama's 8th largest city, with population over 70,000 residents. In the 1990s, this number sat at around 50,000. There are many public parks in Dothan, and much of the city provides a suburban feel, making it a good choice for families who want to raise their children in an area with more space than Alabama's other more densely packed cities. J.B. Hilton Green Beasley was born in Dothan on July 31, 1982, to parents Cheryl and Lanner Beasley. Her sisters described her as someone with a beautiful heart and an undying passion for dance. It was a career she wanted to pursue in the future. J.B. was the type of person who picked up new skills almost instantaneously, and she had a dazzling smile that caught the attention of anyone in the room. Perhaps J.B.'s best trait was her infectious happiness. She could cheer anyone up by just being in their presence. J.B. loved country music and spent most of her weekends with her family and friends. One of those friends was Tracy Hollett. Tracy Hollett was born on March 3, 1982, to parents Carol and Mike Hollett. She had 2 brothers, Chris and Ben Roberts, who were much younger than Tracy. Tracy took her role as big sister very seriously. She always stood up for them, and according to Ben, she wouldn't let anyone mess with us or touch us. Tracy wanted to make a difference and aspired to one day be a missionary and study to become a doctor. Not much else is known about Tracy. Sources differ on the length of Tracy and J.B.'s friendship and how close they were. Some refer to them as best friends, while J.B.'s mother said the girls hadn't been friends for more than a few months. She also said J.B. was clearly the leader and Tracy was the follower. It's unclear exactly what she meant by this. On July 31, 1999, J.B. and Tracy left Dothan together in J.B.'s 1993 black Mazda 929 at 10:05 p.m. Somewhere along the way, tragedy struck. J.B. and Tracy never made it to the party that night. Before they set off, J.B. pulled up to Carol, Tracy's mother's place of work, at 9 p.m. to ask her if it was okay for Tracy to attend the party. The plan was for J.B. to spend the night at Tracy's house so the girls could go to church together the next morning. At roughly 9:20 p.m., J.B. arrived at J.C. Penney to pick up Tracy, who had just finished her work shift. They then set off to attend the party. At 10:30, the girls pulled into a BP gas station to use the payphone. They called their friends, and while it isn't exactly clear what they said, many assume it was either to ask for directions or to tell them they wouldn't be making it that night, since they weren't able to find the location. Shortly after 11:30 p.m., Tracy and J.B. arrived in Ozark, over 20 miles northwest of Dothan. They pulled into the Big Little convenience store and Chevron station on 763 East Broad Street. The store had already closed 30 minutes prior, but a woman named Marilyn Merritt and her daughter were in the parking lot after grabbing some soda from a vending machine. J.B. and Tracy asked Marilyn for directions to U.S. Highway 231, which would have led them back to Dothan. Nothing stood out to Marilyn from this interaction. The girls seemed perfectly okay, despite being lost. Tracy got out of the car and walked over to the payphone. She dialed her mother and told her what was going on. They'd gotten lost and were in Ozark, but had directions for their return trip to Dothan. She ended the call. "Mom, I love you. Be home soon." Tracy didn't seem stressed or overly concerned about their predicament. Carol went to sleep that night, assuming she would wake up to find Tracy home in the morning. That's not what happened. Marilyn watched as the girls pulled out of the parking lot and turned right onto the highway as she told them to do. The drive from that gas station in Ozark back to Dothan should have taken somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes, depending on how quickly the girls drove. Midnight came and went, with no sign of them. Carol waited up until 1 a.m. for her daughter before falling asleep. She had worked on exhaustive nurse's aide shift and simply couldn't keep her eyes open any longer. When she woke up at 5 a.m., Carol discovered Tracy was not back yet. This immediately struck her as odd. Tracy was a responsible girl. She never arrived late, and when they last spoke, she said she was on her way home. What had happened in the hours that made that not the case? Carol sent her husband, Tracy's stepfather, out to drive to Ozark and see if she could find the girls. Maybe they had crashed on their way home and were in a ditch somewhere. Carol alerted the Dothan Police Department to her daughter's disappearance at 8 a.m. Officers started covering the town, looking for any sign of J.B.'s Mazda and either of the girls. There was a chance they had been in some sort of accident on the way home. They could be stuck in the car somewhere needing urgent help, so it was imperative to find them as soon as possible. But there was something the Dothan officers didn't yet know. Ozark police had already found J.B.'s Mazda. It was found parked along Herring Avenue, around a mile from the gas station. Outwardly, nothing seemed obvious wrong with the car. No windows were broken, and there wasn't a mess inside. It was worth mentioning that the tank was empty, and the wheels and sides had mud on them. JB's license was visible on the dashboard, and both her and Tracy's purses were found inside the car. It seemed as though the girls had simply walked away from the car and vanished. The officer on the scene felt an eerie feeling around the car, though. He couldn't come up with a reasonable reason for the occupants of the Mazda to have stopped where they did. The car keys were also nowhere to be found. Why had the girls taken the keys but left their purses? The officer decided to dial Ozark's chief of detectives, Lieutenant Rex Tipton. "I don't know why I'm bothering you, but something about this feels funny," he told them. Little did he know there was very good reason for this, as he was just feet away from the bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Howlett. Lieutenant Tipton told his sergeant to wait with the vehicle while he ran the plates through their database. When he did, a match came from Dothan. They were looking for a car and two missing girls who had been in it the previous night. He called Dothan Police Department and found out about the search for J.B. Beasley and Tracy Holland. Now, both Ozark officers and Dothan officers were searching for the missing girls. Several hours passed with no leads. At around midday, a Dothan officer arrived at J.B.'s Mazda. While he waited for the tow truck, he began looking around the car and the surroundings. He then realized he could open the trunk using a lever inside the car without needing the keys. He popped the trunk and walked around the back of J.B.'s Mazda. As he turned the corner, he made a horrifying discovery. Inside the trunk were the bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Holland. Both J.B. and Tracy had died from single 9mm gunshot wounds to the head. Both of them were clothed and showed no signs of a struggle. Tracy had been shot execution style in the temple. She had a scratch on her arm and thorns stuck in her pants. Her New Balance sneakers, which she purchased just the previous week for $95, were covered in mud, as the car was. Looking at how the girls were positioned, it was clear that Tracy had been placed in the trunk first. J.B. had been shot in the cheek. Like Tracy, her shoes were also covered in mud. To add to the strange scene, both were wet from the knee down. An examination of the scene showed the girls had not been killed where the car was found on Herring Avenue. The authorities now needed to try and identify a possible motive for the crime in the hopes this would help lead them to the killer. A robbery was quickly ruled out since the girls' purses were still inside the car, along with their jewelry, money, and credit cards. However, J.B.'s keychain, which held various keys and her car keys, was missing. Autopsies were conducted and found that neither girl had any traces of drugs or alcohol. Initially, the autopsies also found that neither J.B. nor Tracy had been assaulted. Months later, the state crime lab issued a report that stated traces of bodily fluid had been found on J.B.'s bra, panties, and skin. The discovery of this meant the authorities had now DNA profiled to match the killers. They also had an unknown palm print found on the trunk. 1 month after J.B. and Tracy were found, police had their first solid possible suspect, Johnny Barrentine. 28-year-old Johnny Barrentine left his home at 11:30 p.m. This was right around the time Tracy spoke to her mom over the payphone. Johnny left his wife and young son behind to go out and buy some milk. What should have been a quick trip took far longer than expected. He arrived home at around 1 a.m. and appeared visibly shaken. This was obvious to his wife, so she asked him what had happened. Johnny mentioned he had been hit by a black truck with a Dothan tag near Herring Avenue. In the days following the murders, news of what had happened spread quickly. A reward was offered to anyone who had useful information pertaining to the investigation. After this, Johnny mentioned to his friends that he knew something about the murders. They encouraged him to go to the station and speak to officers about what he knew. On September 1st, Johnny walked into the Ozark PD. He was subsequently interviewed for 4 hours. Over those 4 hours, Johnny's story changed multiple times. It started with him seeing a black truck speeding from Herring Avenue. It changed to Johnny picking up a heavily tattooed man who was hitchhiking before dropping the man off at the gas station. Johnny claimed that he saw the man get into a black Mazda with the two girls. Johnny was asked to follow them, which he says he did. When the Mazda pulled over on Herring Avenue, a confrontation ensued. Johnny left before he saw the girls being murdered, but he claimed he heard 2 gunshots ring out as he drove off. As the interview progressed, this tattooed stranger became a neighbor who lived less than a mile from Herring Avenue. After 4 hours of seemingly tell tales, the detectives decided to arrest Johnny on 2 counts of capital murder. But further issues in this claim soon came to light. Johnny hadn't mentioned anything about violating either of the girls, and the neighbor he mentioned had an alibi for the night of the murders. Immediately after he was charged, Johnny admitted to making everything up. "I made up everything to get the reward money," he later told a grand jury. Johnny's preliminary hearing took place on September 21st. Alabama Bureau of Investigation agent Charles Huggins was brought in to testify. He confirmed that Johnny had described the girl's clothing and other aspects of the scene accurately. Ozark Police Chief Tony R. Spivey said the district attorney, who watched the interview with Johnny, advised them to arrest him. When Chief Spivey announced the arrest, he said they were confident they had their man. He later admitted that they were in a tough spot. "What do?" he said. "If you don't charge him, maybe you just let a killer walk out the door? You're between a rock and a hard place." Johnny remained behind bars, without bond, in the Dale County Jail. On his October 18th bond hearing, Johnny told the judge he wasn't involved in the murders. He added that he hadn't picked up a tattooed man or seen the girls at all that night. Johnny was denied bail, and lawyer Bill Caminos was hired to represent him. Johnny's friends and family didn't believe he was responsible for what happened. His mother, Faye Barrentine, spoke to reporters and said, "He did not do it. He's not capable of doing it. He has a 2-year-old son, and he's not capable of doing anything to hurt a child." Bill Caminos claimed he, too, believed his client was innocent, saying, "As a lawyer, you need to take what your client says with a grain of salt sometimes. But I had a feeling from the very beginning, in viewing the car, in viewing the evidence, I said to myself, no, Johnny Barrentine could not have done this." He added that he believed the authorities had pressured Johnny. He was attracted to the large reward sum to come up with a story that fit the crime scene. They made suggestions to him over those 4 hours in the hopes that Johnny would incriminate himself. Referencing the interrogation, Bill said, "It's all on video, and the questions turn from questions to accusations, from accusations to suggestions." At one of the subsequent hearings, it was alleged that Johnny Barrentine completed his 7th and part of his 8th grades in special education classes. When the news came in that Johnny's DNA was not a match to the found on the scene, the judge approved his bond request. Johnny was released on December 17th. His case was put to a grand jury in January 2000, but they failed to indict him, and he was left off the hook. Now, investigators were back to square one. They had to investigate 2 other men, one who was from Michigan and the other from Mississippi. The man from Michigan had a weak alibi for the night of July 31st and wasn't far from where the car was found. The Mississippi man had been visiting relatives in Ozark, but he got up and left abruptly on August 1st. DNA samples were taken from each of them, but neither men were a match, so they were taken off the suspect list. There was someone else authorities had eyes on, someone who had been captured on CCTV footage in a small white pickup truck in the parking lot of the Big Little convenience store while JB and Tracy were there. After trying to track this person down, the police turned to the public for help by releasing this information. As the years passed, with no new solid leads, the case went quiet despite investigators' efforts to keep it alive. Over 500 interviews were conducted over the course of the investigation, and DNA samples were taken from over 70 potential suspects. It seemed like the authorities had followed up on every possible lead, but were still unable to find the killer. The bizarre nature of the crime leads to conspiracy theories about possible police involvement. In 2015, an auxiliary police officer, Rena Crumb, accused an Ozark police officer of murdering J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hallett and claimed that law enforcement officials knew about the crime and helped cover it up. They allegedly did this by getting rid of evidence and threatening certain people who had information about the crime. Rena mentioned the name of one cop in particular, Gary Whittington. While she didn't say Butch was the one who killed the girls, Rena said he messaged her over Facebook and told her to keep her mouth shut. She mentioned two other names who were involved, Rex Tipton and Edie Henderson. Rena even accused Police Chief Tony Spivey of knowing who was responsible and helping cover up the crime. Rena's story was as follows. The police officer responsible pulled JB and Tracy over on the night of July 31st, 1999, and demanded to know the whereabouts of cassette tapes that contained recordings that could incriminate Ozark officials of drug distribution. Rena believes the girls were going to use the tapes as evidence in an upcoming court case set for early August. Despite Rena naming officers who were supposedly involved in the cover-up, she refused to name the man who was actually responsible. She also made no mention of how JB and Tracy were in possession of these tapes. The officers accused denied Rena's claims, and in 2016, Ozark police officials Keith Cawthon, Rex Tipton, Tony Spivey, Eddie Henderson, and Gary Whittington filed a lawsuit against Rena Crumb and others who helped spread this story. In May 2016, Rena Crumb was arrested for harassment. It wasn't until 2019, almost 20 years after the double murders, that there was renewed hope in finding the man responsible. The Ozark Police Department officially reopened the case, hoping to solve the case using DNA phenotyping. The DNA phenotyping would allow the detectives to find relatives of the killer whose DNA was already in the system. This would greatly help narrow down the suspect's list, should any hits come back. The DNA evidence found on JB and at the scene were submitted to Barrentine labs for testing. This turned out to be very worthwhile, as it directly led to the arrest of 45-year-old Dothan man Coley Lewis McCraney.
Yes, DNA registries are the newest tool for investigators, helping police nab suspects in several high-profile cases.
Nothing in McCraney's history hinted at him being capable of such a violent crime. He came from a blue-collar background, and after graduating from Carroll High School in 1992, McCraney went on to join the Air Force. He served until 1997. In September 1998, McCraney was sued in relation to a pending paternity case. On July 30th, 1999, a judge ordered him to submit his DNA for testing to conclude whether he was his child's father or not. Eerily, this was the day before JB and Tracy were murdered. Apparently, McCraney failed to show for the test, as well as a second test scheduled a few months later. After that, he seemed to move on with his life, having nothing more to do with the law until 2019. Those who knew him thought of McCraney as a man of God. Some sources say he was working as a truck driver at the time of his arrest, while others say he was a pastor. In 2001, McCraney remarried and went on with his life, seemingly blending right in with the rest of the Dothan citizens. He had 6 children and 8 grandchildren. Following the DNA being submitted, the Ozark police were sent a list of names that had some association with the DNA sample. McCraney was brought in for questioning and had a DNA swab taken. This was sent back to Barrentine, who contacted the Ozark officers 3 weeks later, confirming McCraney's DNA matched what they had uncovered at the crime scene. Alabama's state laboratory later confirmed Barrentine's findings. Following his arrest, McCraney was charged with 2 counts of capital murder and 1 count of assault. McCraney pleaded to not guilty to the charges, despite his own DNA tying him to the scene. McCraney's trial was initially set for September 2020, but this was delayed due to massive delays in the court system from the pandemic. The second trial date was set for August of 2020, but Dale County Circuit Court Judge William H. Fillmore had to postpone this again after too few jurors arrived for selection. Of the 250 needed, only 75 showed up. The trial of Coley McCraney finally began in mid-April 2023. It lasted 9 days, with McCraney choosing to take the stand in his own defense. He attempted to explain his DNA being present on JB's body by claiming that they had a consensual encounter in his truck while Tracy waited in JB's Mazda nearby. McCraney said he met JB a few weeks prior and said she had tracked him down at his mother's house on July 31st. He claimed the girls then dropped him off at home following their supposed encounter since his car was broke down, after which they drove away, and he didn't see them again. Unfortunately for McCraney, this testimony did not go down well. Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall headed up the prosecution. He was confident that the fact that they had DNA evidence linking McCraney to the crime proved that he was there that night. They brushed aside this claim of consensual encounter. The prosecution argued that McCraney approached the girls with a gun and forced them into the back of their car. He then drove them to a second location where their shoes and their car got covered in mud before he assaulted JB. He then shot the girls as he placed them in the trunk of the car. Family members of both JB and Tracy testified at the trial. Tracy's mother, Carol, said, "I think the hardest thing that we've gone through is holidays with an empty chair that Tracy should have been in." In 2019, following the arrest, Carol told the CBS News correspondent that they hadn't slept it all night in almost 20 years. "I don't know how many times a night I wake up. Tracy's on my mind," Carol said.
In its case, and on the stand, McCraney told a story that he testified he only shared publicly for the first time today.
Once both sides had laid out their case for the jury, they retired to deliberate. He was found guilty of all counts. Despite the jury being able to recommend the death penalty, they suggested he be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Is that we've known who the killer was of these girls for a long time. We just simply didn't know his name. This jury found his name.
Attorney General Steve Marshall held a press conference following the news. They were on the precipice of being able to begin their lives. They were daughters. They were best friends. They were pillars of their own clique and group of people. They were siblings of brothers and sisters. They were who we are as a community, he said. And yes, I appreciate words from the defense saying they're sorry about the loss of their life. But let's not forget who committed this crime and took those girls away. They'd be 41 years old now. Can you imagine what they would have been able to do with their lives over the past 24 years? And what we have lost because they didn't have that opportunity? Even though Coley McCraney had been convicted and sentenced, the story wasn't quite over yet. Nearly a month after the verdict was reached, his attorneys, David Harrison and Andrew Scarborough, requested a new trial for their client. They claimed that 3 jurors had posted about the trial to social media, while one of them was seen using their smartwatch. This is very much not allowed during a criminal proceeding.
Coley McCraney, the man convicted of killing 2 Northview high schoolers nearly 24 years ago, is asking for a new trial.
At a hearing on July 17, Attorney General Steve Marshall argued that any misconduct by the jury did not influence their final decision. Following the hearing, Dale County Circuit Judge William Fillmore said he would take the request under advisement. By the end of July 2023, he returned with his decision. Coley McCraney would not be given a new trial. McCraney's defense team had stated they planned to file another motion for a new trial within the month of August. They believe the state prosecution failed to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. We will have to wait and see what comes of the appeals. While the DNA evidence certainly is strong, one question that has been raised is how McCraney got the girls to pull over. Remember that Marilyn saw them pull out of the parking lot, yet the prosecution maintained that McCraney approached them with a gun while they were there. If they had, how did Marilyn not see? Or perhaps she had simply seen the car drive away out of her rearview mirror, not having noticed the altercation that took place. What do you think of today's case? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating true crime stories. Until the next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled for the next mystery to unfold.